Okay, so everybody do me a favor. Take a nice deep breath and appreciate this piece of cake that is shown on the first slide. Okay, so after you did that, now take a look at what is on the cake. Sorry to break it to you, but those are fractions. The fractions are 1/4, 1/4, and 1/4. Since there is a piece of cake missing, there is a fraction missing. And you guessed it, we're going to be talking about fractions. Let's take another deep breath. If fractions look as confusing as this number that is outlined on this page, do not sweat. Fractions are not as complicated as they seem. We need to ensure that we go at a pace that is sufficient enough for us. If we try and rush through fractions, then we're going to have difficulty. If we look closely at this picture, we can tell that this funky number represents pi. This should be our method when figuring out fractions, breaking down the steps. The standard outline for my performance task is taken out of context from the New Jersey Student Learning Standards for Mathematics. For 4th grade, the standard I will be focusing on is extending the understanding of fraction equivalence. So what is fraction equivalence, and why do students need to know this? The task that is set up for students will show if they have a clear understanding of what fraction equivalence means. This task is designed for 4th grade students, as I just mentioned. They need to be able to explain why a fraction like 1/2 is equivalent to the fractions 2/4, 3/6, and 4/8, and so on. They need to be able to compare two fractions with different numerators and different denominators by creating common denominators or numerators, or by comparing it to a benchmark fraction such as 1/2. Hopefully I have not lost you yet. If you ever took an assessment with fractions, I feel your pain. It took me forever to understand them, but once I really tried to focus on the content and not worry so much about the grade, I was able to see tremendous success. The task will not be a summative assessment. Instead, it will allow students to use their critical thinking skills to show their understanding. So, what are equivalent fractions, you may be wondering? In math, equivalent fractions can be defined as fractions with different numerators and denominators that represent the same value or proportion of the whole. Equivalent fractions represent the same amount of distance or points on a number line. All equivalent fractions reduce to the same fraction in their simplest form. In this example outlined, 1/4 and 3/4 are not equivalent fractions. We can tell this especially in this picture because there are 3 slices compared to 1 slice. We know that 3 and 1 do not equal each other. 3 is bigger than 1. But what happens when we have different denominators and cannot figure out if they are equal or not? In this example, 3/8 and 6/4 just looks really ugly. We cannot just add the numerators in this case to figure out what the answer is. We need to come up with common denominators for 8 and 4. The easiest one is actually 8. So all we would do is multiply 6/4 by 2 and we would get 12/8. 6 times 2 equals 12 and 4 times 2 equals 8. We will not do anything to 3/8 because 8 goes into 8 one time. In this next example, we need to figure out if these fractions are equivalent. We need to come up with common denominators to see if they are equivalent or not. So we need to come up with common denominators for the numbers 2 and 5. And then we have to come up with common denominators for 8 and 9. The least common denominator for 2 and 5 is actually 10. So we multiply 2 by 5 and 1 by 5. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. For 6/8 and 4/9, the common denominator of 72 was used. So we multiply 8 by 9 and 6 by 9, and then 9 by 8 and 4 by 8. After we do this, we can determine if these fractions are equivalent. After we do that, we can conclude that those fractions are not equivalent. Students will be demonstrating their knowledge of fractional equivalence and how common denominators are needed to figure out to see if fractions are equivalent. Their task is to make a PowerPoint presentation, a children's book, a song, or any presentation mode that they feel best shows their understanding of course content. They will be presenting their task in front of the class, so they need to focus on communication and presentation skills as well. Each student will have the opportunity to present their task in front of the whole 4th grade school district. I want students to have fun with this task. They should be super creative in trying to show their understanding of fractional equivalence and common denominators. I always loved tasks that showed my ability to critically think and be able to express my answers. Simply put, if I was able to demonstrate a task, then I had a clear understanding. If I was not able to perform a task, then I did not have a clear understanding. I think we need to ensure that students do have the ability to have choice when designing presentations. Sometimes performing a play or creating a song will show students critical thinking skills instead of forcing them to do something that they may not be comfortable with. Choice will support children's intrinsic motivation, draw on students' strengths and abilities, and they will be able to self-analyze. Giving students choice will allow them to meet their individual learning needs since they will be actively engaged in the task at hand. Oftentimes in classrooms, there are so many students that are reluctant to talk and participate. So as teachers, how can you really assess them if they do not show engagement? That is why choice is important. Students can decide whatever they want to do based on abilities that best fits their needs on the presentation mode they select. Again, students need to be able to show that they can successfully determine if two fractions with unlike denominators are equal. I keep saying this because this is the standard that students need to understand. This example, we see 13 out of 16, 3/4, 1 over 2, and 5/8. When getting a common denominator for these fractions, students should be able to determine that none of these fractions are equivalent. Students need to be able to show their work and not just say their answers without explanations. They need to be able to determine that 2 over 4 and 4 over 8 are equal, because when finding a common denominator, in this case we can use 8. We can see that 2 over 4 turned into 4 over 8. 4 over 8 and 4 over 8 are equivalent fractions. After the completion of the task, students will self-reflect and state where they think their understanding is at now compared to where it was before the assignment. Students will receive individual grades based on a variety of different factors. Students will be graded on their ability to demonstrate their critical thinking competence. I will be using an analytical rubric. I feel like this is very beneficial for students because they will be able to see what they did well and what they need to work on. Students will be able to use this rubric to see their strengths and weaknesses as well. The criteria will consist of effectiveness of explaining fractional equivalence, effectiveness of communicating and presenting the project to classmates, minimal errors, which shows a clear process of reviewing the work. Work is clearly shown and accurate with examples that are used. Students will be individually graded on their understanding of course material and communication skills. Students need to be able to show that they can effectively communicate their knowledge of course material. They need to be able to say what they are thinking. Communication in this case refers to their tone in which they address the class. Are they talking soft-spoken? Are they talking too loud? Or are they talking just at the right volume for the audience? Students will be also graded on their presentation skills. They need to be able to present their knowledge or information in a way that students and myself will be able to comprehend. I think communication and presentation skills are so valuable, and the more students can focus on them at an early age, the better they will be over time. The more they can take into account their tone while giving a presentation, their eye contact, and their body language, the more effective their presentation will be to the class.